So here we are, one more chapter, one more week, little by little, we are headed towards the end of this beautiful book, and I'm super excited. We are gonna, I believe we will attempt to cover the entire chapter 14 today. It's yes, there's a lot of beautiful, precepts that connect, but I think overall it's not only shorter than the last two or three chapters we've covered, but I feel like it's more straight to the point. And not only that, I do feel that as we have studied more in depth every chapter, a lot of the things are kind of like repetitive, so we don't have to like go so deep in it because we've already covered them in the past chapters. That's the beauty of going precept upon precept and line upon line. So having said that, Steph, let me put you can go ahead and start with the first, the first section of chapter 14, so 1 through 12, and then we'll, go share the slides and the connecting precepts as we've been doing.
Okay. At the time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Yasha and said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him." For Herod had laid hold of John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John said to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." And although he wanted to put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Therefore, he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. So she, having been prompted by her mother, said, "Give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter." And the king was sorry; nevertheless, because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him, he commanded it to be given to her. And so he sent and had John beheaded in prison. And his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. Then his disciples came and took away the body and buried it and went and told Messiah.
Okay. So I don't know if it was you, Steph, or it was Yasmin that the last time, we covered on John the Baptist in the book of Matthew. But we're going to see that this account is basically saying what already had taken place with John the Baptist. We know he had already been arrested from before, he had already been in prison. And they're just relating the fact that you're going to see it here, the fact that Herod here heard the report about Messiah. Excuse me. And so the whole point starts with him hearing about Messiah and him assuming that it was John the Baptist that had reincarnated and come back because the beheading had already taken place. And they're just basically relating the story as to what had happened, like why was he dead, right? So let's just go through some of the well, not connections yet, but the summary of that section. So we see here the John the Baptist is already the immerser. We know him as the immerser. He is introduced again in the book of Matthew. We see that in his day, jail was not the punishment; it was awaiting trial. So his punishment had not been him being incarcerated itself, but the beheading was. We see once John was arrested, he more or less knew his ultimate fate. And Yasha was still a free man, but on track to suffer a fate similar to John's. We see the same account in Mark 6:14 through 29, which we will read briefly, and we will find there's some differences. I want to say more, brings in more details. Let's just say that. And lastly, it was Herod Antipas' wife who wanted John killed. We're going to read that in more details in Mark. John had publicly denounced Herod's marriage as an illicit union and violation of the law of Moses. So because of that, John basically seals his own fate. He goes and he starts condemning these people whom were not even set apart. These people were Romans and clearly not keeping the Most High's laws. But yet we see John the Baptist going to point out their sin, which we know is in scriptures. We're going to see it later on where it's found. So a little bit of history on this dude over here. So Herod Antipas, the wannabe king, that's the name I named it. So in Matthew, Herod is the tetrarch. And in Mark, he is Basilius. King Herod, Herod the Great, is the father of Herod Antipas. So Herod Antipas wanted to be called king, and Rome wouldn't allow it, and Emperor Caligula removed him from office. This is some details that I found from my notes in my study Bible, so just for some historical context. Herod and his advisors had some superstitious and strange views, like, for example, the whole idea of the reincarnation and a whole bunch of other ideas, right? Herod Antipas married his brother Philip's wife. Not unlawful in the Roman law. So that's an observation to make there. These people were pagan, clearly, but it was in the law of Moses, which is why John the Baptist calls it out. Herod was afraid to make John a martyr by executing him. We're going to see later on why, because in those days they had high respect for prophets. And I'm going to point a couple of correlating precepts where it shows how they would even fear doing certain things, even to Messiah, because of fear of how the people would react, for they were considered like prophets, right? So we see Herod's stepdaughter danced for him at a party to impress his guests. Herod offered her up to have my kingdom, which we're going to see very similar story in the Esther account on chapter 5, 1 through 3. We'll read it briefly. And this was an expression of pleasure and generosity, not to be taken literally. Like, again, we're going to see how the king of Persia offers the same to Esther. The stepdaughter asks for John's head on behalf of her mother's wishes. Herod had made a vow before his guests to give her whatever she wanted, so he was stuck. So there's no religious significance to Herod's vow. So remember, he was not keeping Torah. It wasn't something that he was like, oh, I need to keep this vow. It was more of, I need to look good in front of these people that I made this promise, type of thing. Herod thought Messiah was the reincarnated John the Baptist, like I mentioned before. So let me just check really quick. Yes, he was very radical. John the Baptist, I'm assuming you meant. Anyway, okay, so we see here that one of the reasons why not only Herod had this belief on Messiah being the reincarnated John the Baptist, but many did, because of the fact that it was already in prophecies. And we see the connections with the Elijah, with the returning Elijah, and there's so many connections with John the Baptist being the same as the returning Elijah, as well as connections with Messiah in between of all of that. And so there is, again, no biblical record of John performing miracles, but Herod worried about John as a threat to him. So if John arose from the dead, then the threat re-emerged. So prophets were seen as spiritual giants. They were, again, highly esteemed, highly valued. There were well-known prophecies that Elijah would return, like I mentioned, and Rome measured the success of their rulers based on keeping the peace. As we read on Matthew 11, 13 through 14, for all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to receive it, he is Elijah who is to come. And these were the words of Messiah himself. And the prophecy was in Malachi 4:5, as it reads, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Adon. So again, there's another precept that I didn't add here, but you can find it also in Matthew 17:13, which we will covering a couple of weeks later. But in essence, basically pointing out to the connections between Elijah and John the Baptist. And we know that both of them had so many similarities. I didn't do like a side-by-side comparison. Sorry, I didn't mean to go to that slide. Anyway, I didn't do a side-by-side comparison, but we've already discussed, whoever taught about John last time, John the Baptist, how him and Elijah both were basically in the wilderness. They wore like camel leather clothing. They ate, both fed from what's it called, the crickets and like grasshoppers and stuff like that, like and honey. They also were running away. Like, for example, Elijah was running away from, oh my goodness, Jezebel. And then John the Baptist basically now from the Potiphar's, not Potiphar's, oh my goodness, what's it called? Herod's wife, whom had now the daughter dancing from Herod, and both of them asking for John the Baptist's head. So we see very similar stories with both of them. Not to mention, obviously, that they were both prophets. So many connections. But anyway, let's continue. Now I'm going to do the connecting precepts with verse 1. Let's already cover the Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Messiah, and these are the other accounts where it's mentioned. So I am going to read fully this section in Mark because it does add a little bit more understanding. So Mark 6:14 through 29. Now King Herod heard of him, for his name had become well known. And he said, John the Baptist is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him. Others said, it is Elijah, and others said, it is the prophet or like one of the prophets. But when Herod heard, he said, this is John whom I beheaded. He was being raised from the dead. For Herod himself had sent and laid hold of John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. Verse 18, because John had said to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Therefore Herodias held it against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not. Excuse me. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and holy man, and he protected him. And when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. Then an opportune day came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers, and the chief men of Galilee. So I'm going to pause right there, so just to see the added details, not only giving the specifics of, him marrying his brother Philip's wife, while they were still married, etc., but notice how he actually protected John the Baptist. It says here in verse 20, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and holy man, and he protected him. So we see that is to me, is very interesting detail there, because he would have never killed John the Baptist had not that Jezebel type, person come into the picture. And we see maybe there's a reason why John the Baptist went and called out the sin of Herod, because we see like this man clearly had some respect for John the Baptist. Anyway, verse 22, it says, and when Herodias' daughter herself came in and danced and pleased Herod and those who sat with him, the king said to the girl, ask me whatever you want, and I will give it to you. He also swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, up to half my kingdom. So she went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. Immediately she came in with haste to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And the king was exceedingly sorry, yet because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him, he did not want to refuse her. So this is the part that I was saying, that it wasn't so much because, he was keeping a vow. It was more because those who sat in front of him, is almost like that would be humbling and embarrassing for him not to keep his word when people heard it come out of his mouth, type of thing. Where was I? He did not want to. Okay, verse 27. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded his head to be brought. And he went and beheaded him in prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. And the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard of it, they came and took away his corpse and laid it in a tomb. So, okay, so we see that perhaps that's one of the reasons why Herod feared Messiah being the reincarnated John the Baptist. It's almost like he felt judgment is going to befall upon me now for what I did to this holy and set apart man, just man, right? So there's again confirmation of that precept. You also find it in Luke 9:7-9. I'm not going to read it because it's basically the same thing. Then we have connecting with verse 3, where it says, for Herod had laid hold of John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. We have connecting with that Matthew 4:12, where it says, "Now when Yasha heard that John had been put in prison, he departed to Galilee." Again, and I'm showing this just again to point back that he had been imprisoned since Matthew chapter 4, just to give you specifics when he got in prison. So he had been in prison under Herod for all that time. And until now is when he got beheaded. Obviously, we know the reason why. We also see Mark 6:17, for Herod himself had sent and laid hold of John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. Luke 3:19 through 20, again, same exact details. And then we have connecting with verse 4, the reason why he calls out the sin, where he says, it's not lawful for you to have her. Obviously, John is getting this from Leviticus 18:16, where it says, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness, as well as Leviticus 20:21. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. And again, we know that Herod was not obviously a Jew. He was a Roman, but it seemed like he did respect, at the very least, John the Baptist. And I believe this is why, perhaps, aside from being bold and a crazy, in a good way, prophet of the Most High, yes, somebody wanted to say something? I heard something. Okay. Where was I? Anyway, what I was saying is that he was being bold, but he was also probably pointing out the sin, perhaps, and he wanted him to repent. That's what I believe he was trying to do. Okay, I see the chat now. Oh, okay, Steph. Hi, Sylvie. So if anyone can start letting me know in the chat who can continue reading, because Stephanie just told me she won't be able to continue. Okay, thanks, Jess. Okay, so again, we were connecting with now Matthew 5, verse 5, where it says, and although he wanted to put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. And this is the part where I told you guys earlier, the reason why they would fear the prophets. We find that in Matthew 21:26. But if we say from men, we fear the multitude, for all count John as a prophet. Again, these people feared the multitude because when the multitudes viewed someone as a prophet, they would defend them to death from what it seemed like. Luke 20, verse 6, but if we say from men, all the people will stone us, for they are persuaded that John was a prophet. And connecting with verse 6, where it talks about what he promised the girl, where it says, but when Herod's birthday was celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. And again, verse 7, where it says, there he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. We see a different situation in Esther chapter 2, verse 9, where it says, now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. And this is speaking of Esther, by the way, obviously. So he readily gave beauty preparations to her besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace. And he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women, as well as Esther 5:1 through 3. Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half the kingdom. And this is the exact same wording that we see Herod offering Herodias' daughter. Exactly the same thing. So it looks like a pagan tradition to do when they found favor on a girl's, upon a girl. And so again, we know that the king of Persia was obviously pagan, as well as the king of Rome, or the so wannabe king of Rome. So Matthew 10:23 has to do with verse 13. Let me go down. This is already the second. Okay, so we haven't read this. I just remembered. So let's read now the feeding of the 5,000. There's beautiful connections here that I want to cover. So let's read it first, and then we'll cover the connections. So Jess, you said you could read?
Yes.
Thank you.
So up to
13.
verse 21.
Yes.
Okay. When Yasha heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when Yasha went out, he saw a great multitude and he was moved with compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food." But Yasha said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish." He said, Bring them here to me." Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 basketfuls of the fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, beside women and children.
Okay, so this is the first of two events where he multiplies food. There's so many spiritual connections to this account, and let's see it. So feeding the 5,000, and again, it's 5,000, but it's only counting men. So we know that it could have been double, at least. Well, it was at least 5,000, so maybe up to 10,000 people. So imagine that. Imagine the massive amount of people, because you had to include the women and the children as well. So again, we see that Messiah seeks solitude right after he's told that John the Baptist is arrested. I mean, was beheaded. And yes, partly I believe he was sad. Obviously, we know he was sad for sure. But I believe, as we're going to see later on in scriptures, he would usually leave when he would see that they were about to do something to him. So I'm pretty sure the fact that Herod thought, he was the reincarnated John the Baptist, is like, okay, he's after me next. We're going to see that every time that he would discern the thoughts of the Pharisees wanting to capture him, he would disappear from in their midst, and it will say exactly the same thing, how he would go up to the hills, or he would go to the mountains, etc., etc. And I put this precept here. This is what I'm referring to on verse 23. He went up into the hills by himself to pray. But okay, so although Yasha left in, wait, I think this is not the right order. Oh, it is, just kidding, wait. Although Yasha left in a boat, the crowds found him. So the multitudes were not coming for salvation, they were coming for healing. And that's important to note, because at that point, they did not know he was the Savior. So they were going after the bread and the fish, meaning they weren't, I'm saying that metaphorically. Obviously, they didn't know they were going to get fed like real food, but they were going for the bread and fish is a metaphor for they want something out of him, right? They want healings, they want deliverances, they want something tangible that they can obtained from him. So that was the reason why they were pressing on him. So at the end of the day, the disciples show up and tell Messiah to stop, basically because they were tired. He was tired, and they're like, we need to eat, and these people need to eat, right? Like, send these people back. So obviously the disciples had only brought enough to eat for themselves, which is why it was so little, which I even think it was little for even them. If you think about it, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish for 13 people sounds like very little, unless they were on a deficit. But yes, I guess that's how it was in those days, right? A lot of walking, very little eating. No wonder they were fit. But anyway, so it's a food miracle and has plenty of spiritual implications. So the first thing that I want to point out is that the Most High emphasizes the importance of food throughout the Bible, beginning at the creation. There is a reason why from the very beginning he speaks of not only creating the trees and the, every fruit bearing, seed bearing, wait, fruit bear, am I saying that backwards? But you get what I'm saying. Like every tree basically and its fruit, it was for us to eat, etc., etc. Then we see after the fall of man, the division between the clean and the unclean animals, and the clean been given to men for food. And all of this has crazy spiritual implications. It's so crazy because every time I promise you that I'm studying something and I'm getting ready to share a message, I promise you I go on social media and the first thing that I find is like, boom, something that adds on to what I already had. So I know that's the Holy Spirit. That's how he works, man. It's beautiful. So I had this person, humble disciple, just post about the correlations between Leviticus 11, which is obviously the chapter that speaks of clean and unclean animals, and the connection with us eating, us needing clean food in the spiritual aspect as well. And all the connections, I exhort you ladies to go and look at it because it's on point. But anyway, I'm adding this, I'm sharing this because everything that has to do with food in the scriptures has to do about spiritual, it has double meaning and it has spiritual implications for us. So what is food is coupled with the abundance of it. The Most High provision for food is at the center of his will, and food refers to both physical and spiritual throughout scriptures, everywhere. Messiah urges folks to feed the hungry, and we know that he also says to feed his sheep. So it's very spiritual. It's twofold in every sense of the word. He is the bread of life. He even speaks of those who thirst and hunger for truth. They shall be fed, etc., etc. So we know it's very twofold. So feed the hungry people with food, instruct means it's equal to instruct his people with his word, right? So the breaking of bread was a Jewish ceremonial practice. We see that throughout, that they would always break bread, like in the physical aspects, which, by the way, this is why we call this coming together and digesting his word as breaking bread as well, because it's twofold, right? So Messiah's divine character was on display, and he taught the disciples that their truest job was to serve the people. Crowds of over 5,000 found him. He healed them and then ordered the disciples to feed them with only 5 loaves and 2 fish they had brought with them. So the 5 loaves, I believe, represents the 5 books of the Torah. The 2 fish, I believe, represents the 2 houses, meaning the both kingdoms that were split, both the house of Israel and the house of Judah, which obviously make up the whole Israel, right? But I also put a question mark here because just today it dawned upon me, like, could it, since the 5 loaves represents the 5 books of the Torah, could it also be that the 2 fish linked to the 2 greatest commandments of the Torah? Question mark. That's why I added it. I don't know if you guys want to add to that or what you guys see there, but I did definitely want to add that question mark there. I know for sure that the 12 baskets that were leftovers represented the 12 tribes of Israel, which is why I believe the 2 fish obviously have to do with the 2 houses. But again, I don't know, maybe, just maybe, could mean the 2 greatest commandments as well. So the Most High has no limits on the abundance that he can supply. Let me just keep up with the chat. Yes, people definitely didn't eat like us in those days. Oh, yes, Jess, you're talking about the post. Yes, they said, eat the word, walk the walk, be clean. Yes, that's the connections with Leviticus 11. So much was said in the caption. I saw it too. I was like, ooh, I literally saw it right before I jumped on the Zoom. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's Abba like adding confirmation. But anyway, let's continue. I have here 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 42 to 44. It says, then a man came from Baal Shalisha and brought the men of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley bread and newly ripened grain in his knapsack. And he said, give it to the people that they may eat. But his servants said, what? Shall I set this before 100 men? He said again, give it to the people that they may eat. For thus says the Adon, they shall eat and have some left over. So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over according to the word of the Adon. So it's so crazy. I wanted to add this from 2 Kings because in this account we see a very similar, spiritual implication to a very physical act of eating, right? The same thing, give it to the people that they may eat, and then they shall eat and have some left over. Again, connecting with the Most High has no limits on the abundance that he can supply. And we see the same thing. So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over according to the word of the Adon. So again, and we see also here where it talks about bread of the first fruits, understanding that Messiah is also the first fruits and he's also the bread of life. So yes. And then obviously being loaves of barley, and we know what barley represents, right? Barley represents the righteous fruit, the first fruit, literally the set apart, those in covenant with Abba, that are marked and sealed by him. So many connections here. So, okay, let's do now the connecting precepts for verse, let me just move this out of the way, sorry, put it here. So for verse, we were reading verse 13 and on. Okay, so for verse 13, where it says, when Yasha heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. So connecting with that, we have Matthew, we have a few. We have Matthew 10:23. When they persecute you in the city, flee to another. For assuredly I say to you, you will not have gone through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. And again, this is connecting that Messiah would always tell his disciples, when they are persecuting you, go flee, which is the same thing he would do. And we're going to see it now in Matthew 12:15. But when Yasha knew it, he withdrew from there, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all. Again, when Yasha knew it is speaking of, obviously, he knew what the Pharisees were planning against him. Mark 6:32-44 is the other account that speaks of the matter. So let's read it just for more details. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Yasha, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. And I love this account in Mark because it does add that detail. I'm like, oh, by Messiah's heart. And then obviously comparing us to the sheep, his people, right? So he began to teach them many things. Another thing that I liked from Mark is that before he healed them, he began to teach them. So right there, giving them the spiritual food, right? Verse 35, when the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, this is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. But he answered and said to them, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat? But he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said, 5 bread and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. By the way, I love the hundreds, the ranks, because even from in the Torah, we see how Abba would always number the people and put them in ranks. And we also see it like in the book of, I think it's Daniel and Revelation, with the troops of the armies, how they're always in ranks, like in hundreds and in, So I thought that was pretty interesting how he grouped them like that, right? Verse 41, and when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men. And again, they're just counting here the 5,000 men, but we know in Matthew that it speaks only men were 5,000, not counting the children and the women. And again, we find another confirming this account took place in Luke 9:10-17. I don't think there's anything else here, not from what I remember. But yes, I think it's pretty much the same thing. So I'm gonna skip it, but you can add it for your notes. So we have John 6:1-2. It says, after these things, Yasha went over to the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Then a great multitude followed him because they saw his signs, which he performed on those who were deceased. So again, this is just confirming that the people were not following him because they wanted, you know, they wanted to be saved. Basically, they were looking for healing because they saw what he had already done to other people. So, in other words, in the metaphor of it, seeking the bread and the fish. Now, concerning verse 14, hold on, let me just look at the chat. Yes, the manna that came out from heaven. Yes, absolutely. And the divine order. Yes, that's what I thought of too, Steph, when it comes to like him grouping the people. There's like an order with that, right? That I thought was pretty cool. So connecting verse 14 where it says, and when Yasha went out, he saw a great multitude and he was moved with compassion for them and healed their sick. Oh, I left my water. Sorry, I was trying to take a sip of water. My throat is so dry. But anyway, let me continue. So yes, connecting with verse 14, Matthew 9:36. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them because they were weary and scattered, again, like sheep having no shepherd. And that was in Matthew 9. We also see that in Mark 6:34. And Yasha, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. And that we had read already. So he began to teach them many things. Connecting with verse 15, where it says, when it was evening, his disciples came to him saying, this is a deserted place and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away that they may go into the villages to buy themselves food. And again, when I read this, I don't read it with disciples were demanding Messiah at all. I think, sometimes the way it's written is very cut to the, straight to the point. But I can imagine the level of respect that these disciples would approach Messiah, not like ordaining him, like or commanding him, but more like, hey, master, do you think it would be a good idea to send these people? They're probably hungry. Like, and more like day-to-day language, I can see them speaking to each other like that. And even the way Messiah would answer them too. But it's funny because when we read things, sometimes it's very like, and then this happened, they said this, they said that. And people assume that they were just very like, no respect. But I don't believe it was so. Because obviously the love that they have for them. But again, connecting with verse 15, we have Mark 6:35. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, this is a deserted place and already the hour is late. In other words, they're like in a wilderness type thing, and they're like, what are we gonna eat? Luke 9:12, when the day began to wear away, the 12 came and said to him, send the multitude away that they may go into the surrounding towns and country and lodge and get provisions, for we are in a deserted place here. So here it sounds a little bit more like how they would probably speak, right? Like, hey, we're like in a deserted place here. Like, there's nothing to eat. What you want us to do? So, hold on. Yeah, they were getting hangry. Okay, so verse 19. Okay, I'm going to skip to 19 where it says, then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So connecting with verse 19, I want to read this from 1 Samuel. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of context with this precept here in 1 Samuel. I just thought some way, somehow it connects. So this is when Saul was, before he, Samuel, the Most High told Samuel, Saul is going to be the next king of Israel, right? So give you a little bit of context in this story. Saul is looking for the donkeys from his father that had escaped, right? And so in the way to find the donkeys, he starts asking people like, oh, have you seen the donkeys? And some other people basically tell him like, look for the seer. The seer is the prophet. Because seers or prophets usually, they hear from the Most High, so they'll be able to guide you where to find these donkeys. And so in that, Saul says, oh yeah, sure, let's do that. And then they spoke about Samuel being like the seer of the Most High and whatnot. And then they speak amongst each other like, oh, but we need to bring the seer, the prophet, something to eat, something. So they're basically telling each other like, okay, so we're going to bring him this food. But I'm just going to read this to bring this understanding, and you'll see why now. 1 Samuel 9, verse 13. As soon as you come into the city, you will surely find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. And this is someone telling Saul where he would find Samuel, okay? Just so you guys know. Like, you will surely find him has to do Saul finding Saul, okay? I mean, Saul finding Samuel. And then it says, for the people will not eat until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited will eat. Now, therefore, go up, for about this time you will find him. So why am I adding this here? Because we see a connection between every time Messiah would eat, that they would give thanks. They would give thanks before they would break bread together. And we see that this custom came probably because of this huge significance. It says here, for the people will not eat until he comes, not because Samuel would come, but because he must bless the sacrifice. So in other words, I believe that has to do with blessing the meal that they were about to partake. And I know everybody does that for the most part. They give grace. I know Sylvie has been sharing her testimony with her family before they break bread, holding hands and giving, saying grace. But I just wanted to point that out because I thought that was very interesting, that they would do that before the sacrifice that Samuel was about to perform. So we see it in Matthew as well, 15, verse 36, and he took the 7 loaves and the fish and gave thanks, broke them and gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitude. And again, this chapter is going to be from another, Stephanie's going to be talking about this next week, about willing, but it has another account of another multiplication of the bread and fish that he does again with a different crowd. And we're going to see some other connections there. Matthew 26:26. And as they were eating, Yahshua took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to the disciples and said, take, eat, this is my body. And we see, obviously, he also did that right before their Last Supper that they had right before the Passover. We also see Mark 6:41, and when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So again, before we eat, we look how Messiah, let's follow his example. Messiah looked up to heaven and blessed the food and gave thanks, right? Mark 8:7, they also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to set them also before them. As well as Mark 14, verse 22, and as they were eating, Yahshua took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them and said, take, eat, this is my body. Another account which has to do with the Last Supper. As well as in Luke 24:30, now it came to pass as he sat at the table with them that he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. And I believe this account is already either, was it before the resurrection, like at the Last Supper, or after? Because I know he broke bread with them one more time after he resurrected. Well, more than one time, but one time recorded right after resurrection. And we also see in the book of Acts now with the disciples. Acts 27:35, and when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to the Most High in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Which, by the way, spiritual implications of that is that's why we pray before we even read the word. We're breaking bread in the spiritual sense, so we pray and we thank Abba for the bread that we're about to partake in and eat and give him thanks, right? So connecting with verse 22, it's another section. I just realized that. All right, so let's continue reading, Jess. Any questions up to this point? Comments or concerns? Because we're not going to talk about the bread and the fish anymore. I do want to point out, let me go back to the slides. Give me a second. I do want to point out again that he had 5 loaves and 2 fish in this account, and then 12 baskets were left over. Later on, next week, we're going to see in chapter 15 that he feeds a different multitude this time around. I believe it was a little less people, but still like a large amount of people. And he has 7 baskets left over. I don't know, but it seems like obviously he's trying to point to some mysteries with the numbers, 7 being the number of completion. And again, he's always feeding his sheep. I know Stephanie's going to get more into details with that, but I did want to connect that because it connects so beautifully with what they're doing later on. And yes, like Stephanie's already getting ahead of herself for next week, the 7 churches, which also represents the completion of the 2 houses, the entire church, right? Beautifully said. I had not read your comment, so let me read it. It says, him saying thanks and breaking the bread seems like it was a foreshadowing of the Passover meal he had with the disciples, like he did it with the multitude and later more intimately with the 12. Absolutely. I mean, but I do believe he would do it every time they would break bread, because I do see him do, I believe they did it after he resurrected as well. But yes, in essence, yes, absolutely. Also preparing for that, for he was going to become the unleavened bread. And obviously the lamb, we know that. I mean, he wasn't going to become he was already the unleavened bread, but you know what I mean. Take this as a representation of who he was. Like he was the unleavened bread. Okay, yes. I mean, Jessica. No, I didn't. All right, let's continue then. So if it's too much of a mission, I can finish reading. I can finish reading actually. It's just two more sections. So I'm gonna just read and then do the connections. Verse 22. Did I go through verse 22 already? No, I didn't. All right, so I'm gonna read this section and then the last section is just, let me just read everything because the last section is just 3 more. All right, so immediately Yahshua made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent multitudes away, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the 4th watch of the night, Yahshua went to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out for fear. But immediately Yahshua spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Adon, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had come out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Yahshua. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Adon, save me." And immediately Yahshua stretched out his hand and caught him, and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of Elohim." When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent out into all that surrounding region, brought to him all who were sick, and begged him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched it were made perfectly well. All right, so now let's connect this next portion, which we see that this, by the way, immediately took place right after he fed the multitudes, right? He sent them away and he sends his disciple on a boat, and then he goes to the other side, probably to seek alone time with Abba to pray. Probably no, I know that because there's in the connections, the precepts. So we have, I want to make an observation that only the Most High in scriptures has walked on water. So enough for the disciples to know who was in front of them, right? So the 4th watch equals 3 a.m. through 6 a.m. That's what it means when it says that they were on the 4th watch. So it was pretty darn late, and these people must have been exhausted, by the way. So Mark says Messiah saw the boat was in trouble. We're going to read it in the Mark account later, but yes, it adds that detail that he sees the wind, the boat in some trouble, so that's why he starts walking towards them. In the Greek, eido, it means a see with eyes or to know. So in other words, Messiah probably did not see it with his physical eyes, but perceived it for him being obviously an Elohim. So Yahshua began walking on the water towards the boat. The disciples screamed in terror, "It's a ghost!" In Spanish, it would be like, "Ay, me sale muerto." So water was associated with evil spirits and scary creatures that lived in the deep. In other words, the marine kingdom. And if you know, you know. We know the legends of the so-called legends of mermaids and other creatures. is actually in the book of Enoch, and it's not so much a legend, but these people understood the intensity of the marine kingdom and its creatures. So I can only imagine why they would freak out when they would see this quote unquote ghost walking towards them. So seeing Messiah was an epiphany. What's an epiphany? A sudden, powerful realization or insight that changes how you understand something. In other words, they had like it's almost like an aha moment type of thing, like, you are the son of the Elohim, you are the son of the Most High, just by seeing him walk on water, right? As if they had not noticed by then. It was confirmed at this point. So in their days, wisdom was seen as a person of the Most High. And we're going to read it in the book of Sirach, a beautiful chapter 24, that confirms that wisdom is indeed our Yeshaya. Matthew projects Messiah as the embodiment of wisdom, which confirms Sirach 24. Yasha says that it is I and not to be afraid. Also, I can almost even hear that as saying, I am, right? Haya, right? Not to be afraid. So only Matthew shows Peter exiting the boat. The other accounts, Luke, Mark, do not show Peter exiting the boat. Peter walked on the surface, but then sank. At first, his excitement overcame his fears. Peter yells out, Adon, save me, and Yasha does. So connecting precepts with this, I put it right here. It's Job 9, 7 through 8. If he commands it, the sun won't rise and the stars won't shine. He alone has spread out the heavens and marches on the waves of the sea. So we see that the Most High is the only one. Who the Most High is the only one that walks on the waves of the sea. We also see a connection with, this has to do with the parting of the Red Sea, but I don't know, I see something here. Psalm 77, 19 through 20. Where it says, your road led through the sea, your pathway through the mighty waters, a pathway no one knew was there. You led your people along that road like a flock of sheep with Moses and Aaron as their shepherds. And again, this has to do, I believe this is David doing a recount of what took place when the Most High made a pathway through the mighty waters. But again, it says you led your people along that road like a flock of sheep with Moses and Aaron as their shepherds. And obviously we know that there was a pillar of fire with them by day and of cloud by night, which we know was Messiah. I know he parted the sea, but it's almost to show the dominion that he had over the waters, not only to walk on it, but to walk through it and to give the authority to tell them to split, right? So that's why I added this here. And the third connecting precept, taking it back to the beginning, Genesis 1, verses 1 through 2. In the beginning, the Most High created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit, the Ruach of the Most High was hovering. And we know that hovering is this, right? Hovering is being over the surface of the water. So only the Most High walks on water. And again, the disciples understood this, which I believe is what led to the epiphany of the realization of who Messiah truly was. And then in this section of verses 22 to 33, 33, we see Messiah basically telling them the context of it all, do not be afraid, right? Yes, Yasmin, it's when it hits, right? You had an epiphany moment probably. So when he says you of little faith, right? Peter is a representative of us all, of all of us, basically. In Greek, diastazine, however you pronounce that, means divided mind. And it is a natural human behavior to focus more on our fears than on the Most High. So stop judging Peter for for looking back and thinking we all do it, we've all done it, right? So focusing on him takes concentration, effort, and determination. So it's not just saying like, oh, I'm gonna do it by faith. No, doing it by faith means you're going to focus on him the entire time. It takes a lot of concentration and effort on our behalf and a lot of death to our flesh, literally just focusing on his promises. That's what faith really is. Peter was fine when he focused on Messiah. And that's the problem, that a lot of us will begin our focus on him, but some way, somehow lose that focus because, again, faith is seeing without seeing, basically. It's how is it that Hebrew word said word by word? Faith is the essence of what is not seen, or no, that's in the Corinthians. But heck, you know what I mean, right? I don't want to butcher up any precepts. But basically, if you stop seeing in the spirit because so you're too focused on what you're seeing in the physical sense, then you're gonna lose your focus like this. So in other words, I'm gonna give you guys an example. If Abba promised you something, like let's say a job, like I'm gonna not a job specific, but I'm gonna provide, you will lack nothing, right? But then all you're seeing is your bills collecting, piling up. All you're seeing is that you're running out of money and your pantry is running out of food. And even though there's 100,000 promises in scriptures that he tells us that do not worry about tomorrow or what tomorrow brings, basically because he feeds even the birds and he'll feed you as well. But we lose sight of his voice. We lose sight of that and we'll focus on what our eyes are seeing in this realm. And that is exactly what Peter did. He lost focus on his word, which is Mashiach, and he looked at his environment and what was taking place. Remember, when Messiah was walking to the boat, it was because the boat was shaking. So Peter had a reason to look back. He's like, oh snap. Not only was he walking on water, but it's like, dang, I'm gonna sink. So when his focus switched to the storm, it became bigger than Yasha. Fear is the opposite of faith. Trust and faith is not more prayer. Trust and faith is living out our prayers. That's a shirt right there. I'm going to say it again. Trust and faith is not more prayer. Trust and faith is living out our prayers, right? It takes, it's not just saying, it's doing, right? It's faith plus works. So our faith will lead us to do, as I always say. When a believer is sinking, our Savior is there for us. Failure of faith will occur, and that's something that I've had to learn the hard way, because I was so brainwashed into not believing, or more like thinking that, oh, as a believer, you can't lack faith because that means that you're not a true believer. But guess what? We're still in the flesh, and it will happen. It will happen. It does not mean, however, that we have abandoned the Most High or that he has abandoned us. Perfect example, Peter sinking, Messiah saving him, right? Our prayer should be, help my unbelief, as stated by the Father who asked for healing for his son in Mark 9:24. Help my unbelief, because it is so easy to lose focus of the Most High. And as it says on Psalm 69:1-3, I'm going to read it. Save me, O Elohim, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no standing. I have come into deep waters where the floods overflow me. I am weary with my crying. My throat is dry. My eyes fail while I wait for my Elohim. And I don't know about you ladies, but I have probably in my own words have said this prayer more than 100,000 times to him, because it is very easy to say, oh yes, I believe in him. But when you feel the waters in the obviously metaphorical sense drowning you, it's very easy for us to lose focus. And that should always be our prayers. Please save us. I am drowning. In order for me to stay focused, I need to cry out to him over and over again. In order for, exactly like it says here on 2 Samuel 22:17, he reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of the deep waters. And we know that this has many spiritual implications, this precept right here. And this is again David speaking as well. But it's not only out of marine kingdom waters, but it's in a spiritual sense waters, right? James 1:6 says, but he is to ask with faith without doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed about by the wind. So why do I add this here? Because when we cry out for him to save us, we must believe that he will indeed save us. If Peter wouldn't have believed that his master, his Elohim could save him, he wouldn't have cried out, right? We must believe that he will save us, and he indeed will always save us. Yes, Silvana. Darkness creatures cover the deep waters. Oh, yes, yes. I'm going to read the the precept that Yasmin is sharing here. Galatians 6:9, and let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. And that applies actually with not losing our focus on him too. Absolutely. Absolutely. She's saying crazy because he has promises for New Jerusalem. And sometimes we were like, will we really make it? Absolutely. Also, I'm thinking about we're baptized when we were baptized in water. I think that's what you meant to say. Abba literally make us new by putting us in living waters and us stand up after. Absolutely. He went out there initially believing already he would save him and protect him. Absolutely. Yes, Stephanie. I do indeed believe that's even the reason why he dared to get out, say, call me and I'll command me to go and I'll go to you, right? He believed on him. Peter knew who Messiah was. It was revealed to him already. And by the way, I do believe a lot of disciples did have the epiphany or the confirmation Messiah was who he was, but we're going to see later that some of them, like Nathaniel, and even Peter, I believe they knew who Messiah was already. But as a whole, it was all confirmed to the 12 at that point. So, okay. So, oh, I just realized this is so blurry. Okay. I can barely even read it here. My phone, it didn't look like that. But Mark 6:52 says, for they had not understood about the loaves because their heart was hardened. I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read this now to explain to you what this means. Okay. So the disciples discovered something they had not been able to accept. Matthew 3:16 through 17. And suddenly a voice came from heaven saying, this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased, right? This is when Messiah got baptized, immersed underwater, just like Yasmin was saying, being born again of the Spirit, right? Coming out of deep waters. Immediately we see the Father speaking loudly, and not only having the confirmation through the dove, but also saying, this is my beloved son. And we know the disciples were already there with him. But it's almost like it took this event of him walking on waters for them to have that epiphany. So the son of the Most High is a biblical term for a king of Israel. But now the disciples understand that Yahshua is indeed a deity, or like we say in Elohim, meaning the Most High's offspring, his literal son, right? The first fruit. Mark 6:52 is not about how the disciples responded to the walking on water, but rather to the fishes and loaves miracle. And I just realized I don't think we've read it fully. I put it here, but let's go to the connecting precepts so we can see that and bring that understanding. So verse 22, connecting with verse 22, where it says, immediately Yahshua made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. We have Habakkuk 3:15. You walk through the sea with your horses, through the heap of great waters. And again, this is another confirmation. This is a prophecy, by the way. And more than a prophecy, it's a prayer that Habakkuk is doing because he sees a vision of the end times. And he's seeing in this end time vision, he's seeing Messiah walking through the sea with his horses through the heap of great waters. And why am I adding this here in regards to verse 22? Because again, he sends his disciples on the boat to go to the other side, right? While he sent the multitudes away. So it's almost like a confirmation that what he did with the disciples, he also will do when he comes back by sending the horses, which I'm assuming have to come with the angels, right? The who even knows the 12 tribes that are judging all Israel, right? Or the 12 disciples. You walk through the sea with your horses. So we see him sending the horses through the heap of the great waters. We also see for verse 23, where it says, and when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And again, he would do this very often. Now, when evening came, he was alone there. And key for us is that we also need that time alone with our Abba. So connecting with verse 23, we have Mark 6:46. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Luke 9:28, same thing. Now it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings that he took Peter. Oh no, this is not the same account. This is something else. This is just to point out that he went to the mountain to pray. But this is, I believe, when oh my gosh. the thing that he became like transparent and glowing. I forgot the word for that, but y'all know what I'm talking about. The transfiguration. It came back to me. Thank you, Abba. John 6:15 through 16. Therefore, when Yasha perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. Now, when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea. Okay, so we also see him retrieving every time he saw some type of activity that was happening that was out of order, wasn't supposed to happen. He would depart to the mountains, but we know that he would also do that to pray. And again, I put it here, but we had already read it, confirming that only the Most High walks on water. Job 9:8, he alone spreads out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. We see it here more with the word treads. On the other translation, which I believe was the NLT I used, was march on the waves of the sea. I like the marching better because it's more clear. Acts 23, let me see. Acts 23 has to do with verse 27, where it says, but immediately Yasha spoke to them, saying, be of good cheer. It is I, do not be afraid. Acts 23:11, but the following night the Adon stood by him and said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. So we see Messiah would often address his disciples, be of good cheer, as well as Acts 27:22-25. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. This is now Paul speaking. For there stood by me this night an angel of the Elohim, to whom I belong and whom I serve, meaning Mashiach, saying, do not be afraid, Paul, you must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, the Most High has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore, take heart. In other words, take heart is the same as be of good cheer. Take heart, men, for I believe the Most High, that it will be just as it was told to me. Verse 36, then they were all encouraged and also took food themselves. So again, be of good cheer has to do with bringing encouragement and helping our unbelief. It helps our unbelief. It increases our faith. And there's another precept that I forgot to add. The part where Messiah tells the disciples of the end times and the things that are going to take place, but then he tells them, but be of good cheer. In other words, another translation says, take courage, for I have overcome the world. And that is a reminder to us today, always take courage, be of good cheer. He already overcame. So for us not to fear, for our unbelief to be taken away, right? Matthew 6, this is verse 31 now. Moving down here, and immediately Yasha stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? Again, that's all of us identified there. Verse 31, that's Matthew 6:30. Now if Elohim so clothes the grass of the fields, which today is, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? In other words, always remember his promises. That's the example I gave earlier, Matthew 8:26. But he said to them, why are you fearful, O you of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And again, this is when the boat was being shaken, and they thought like they're gonna like see the Most High in person, like in the heavenly realms that day. But no, Messiah came and rebuked the winds, but he did point out their little faith. Connecting with verse 33, we have, then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of Elohim. And this is the epiphany moment there. Connecting with that, we have a few precepts. We have Psalms 2, verse 7. I will declare the decree. The Adon has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. And we know that this is a prophetic psalm speaking of Messiah. Matthew 16:16, Simon Peter answered and said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living Elohim. But of course, we know that Peter already had this revelation from before. Matthew 26:63, but Yasha kept silent, and the high priest answered and said to him, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. And again, we know that, okay, this is Mark 11. I was going to read this one, but Mark 1:1. Let me read it. The beginning of the gospel of Yahshua Mashiach, the Son of the Most High. And again, this is Mark writing, but already pointing out the obvious that they knew he was the son of the Elohim. But this is what I was going to relate to, relating this, that the high priest asking Messiah if he was the son of God, right? But we know that even as stated in Luke 4:41, that and demons also came out of many, crying out and saying, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the Most High." And he, rebuking them, did not allow them to speak, for they knew that he was the Messiah. So what I was going to say, that even the demons knew this. Even the demons knew this, but this high priest could not understand that. John 1:48 through 49. And this is what the part I was saying earlier, that Nathanael had that revelation that Messiah was indeed the Son of the Most High, because this was when he was called. So Nathanael said to him, meaning called as one of the disciples, Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Yahshua answered and said to him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered and said to him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." And later we see, if you continue reading that precept, that Messiah says, "Oh, only because I called you out, you believed." And like he basically said, wait till you see what else you're gonna witness. But yes, he already had that kind of like revelation at that point, just by Messiah calling him, letting him know who he was before even meeting him. I want to read. Okay, Matthew 23. Psalms. Yasmin is sharing Psalms 23, verse 20. No, it's weird the way you put it here. You put 23, but it says 1 through 6. Okay. The Adon is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul and leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Adon forever. Amen. Blessed were his eyes, for he saw. Yes, amen. And then that was obviously David writing this beautiful psalm, but it is also such a reminder for us not to fear, for he is truly our shepherd, and he will surely lead us to the green pastures and to the New Jerusalem. All right, let's continue. John 6, John 6, 68 to 69. But Simon Peter answered him, Adon, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Also, we have come to believe and know that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And again, this is after we know the very popular John 6, 6, 6, where all the people that were following him at that point no longer followed him anymore, because he asked, basically to take out their staff and follow them, and it was something too hard for them to do. So we see that Messiah later, right there, asks the rest of the disciples, you guys are going to go too? And that was obviously Peter's answer. So he was basically saying, we already come to believe that you are the Messiah. Like, where else are we going to go, right? John 11, 25 through 27. Yahshua said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. And this is on the account of Lazarus, by the way. And he's talking to Martha, I believe, here, or one of the sisters. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Adon, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of the Most High, who is to come into the world. So there's another confirmation that also the women that were walking together with Messiah believed in him, that he was the Messiah, that he was the Son of the Most High. We also have Acts 8:37. Then Philip said, if you believe with all your heart, you may. And this is the eunuch when he wanted to get baptized, by the way. And he answered and said, meaning the eunuch answered and said, I believe that Yahshua HaMashiach is the Son of the Most High. So we see later on the disciples carrying the work of the ministry, bringing it, to all the nations, but also proclaiming and not proclaim, but basically leading people to not only believe, but confess that they do believe in him indeed. Romans 1:4. and declared to be the Son of the Most High with power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection from the dead. Paul's words in regards to Mashiach. So regarding verse 34, before I go to verse 34, let me just show the next slide. Because this is to do with the very last portion that we're reading now, that we're connecting now. The last three, I think it's 3 or 4 Bible verses. So basically we see that when Yasha lands in Gennesaret, the people recognize him, but they recognize him obviously because of the works that he was already doing, right? So a crowd gathers to plead for healing. And then we see Yasha ward the tzitzi and what other translations render as hem or fringes. So we see in this account that merely touching his tzitzits healed them. And we're going to see now, I know one of the girls, I think it was Stephanie, had spoken about this with the precept in Matthew that spoke about the woman with the condition, with the blood condition, who got healed by touching his tzitzi as well. But we see when we look into the Strong's Concordance into what the hem or the garments represented, or fringes in other translations, it was literally the tassel or tuft. The Jews had such appendages attached to their mantles to remind them of the law. And if you did the Galatians study with me, you know that that was the sign that they were to carry after they broke the covenant, the circumcision covenant done through Abraham, all the way through Moses, and then broken at the sin of the golden calf. So this was their physical sign, which Messiah was carrying because he was born under the law. So he was bearing the sign of the covenant of the Levitical priesthood, right? Reminding them of the law. And we see that this is what the people were touching. And we see a connection in that in Numbers 15, 37 through 40, where it says, speak to the children of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corner of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners. And you shall have a tassel that you may look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Most High and do them. And then I had screenshotted this from my stories, my highlights that I have put. And this is in regards the woman with the blood disease, right? So when the woman with the blood disease said, if I only touch the hem, in other words, his fringes, right, of his garments, I will be healed. This is what she meant. She knew what fringes or tzitzi, right, represented, which was literally a reminder to keep the Torah. So now let's connect the rest of it's only 3 more. It was 3. I said 3 or 4, but it was indeed 3. So verse 34, speaking of crossing over to Gennesaret, we have Mark 6:53, just confirming that he indeed crossed. We have Luke 5:1 as well, but it had some more details. It says, so it was as the multitude pressed about him, similar to the lady with the blood flow, right, condition, to hear the word of the Most High, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret. And we see that they came to hear the word, right? But they pressed about him. Mark 5:24, let me see, this has to do with verse 36, where it says, and begged him that they might only touch the hem of his garment, and as many as touched it were made perfectly well. Same exact situation than with the lady, which we will see here. I put it again. Mark 5:24-34, so Yasha went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians. By the way, I don't think it's by coincidence that it was 12 years to be exact. I don't know. And nothing in scriptures is by coincidence. 12 representing the 12 tribes and their bondage, right, that they were in. Verse 26, and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Messiah, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his tzitzi. For she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Yasha, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? But his disciples said to him, you see the multitude thronging you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Now, I do want to point something that has been brought more because of the understanding that I gained while doing the study of the Galatians. You ladies that were with me probably can see it already. So the tzitzit represented the Levitical law that was still in place because Messiah had still not died as the lamb, as the fulfillment, right? As the blood ratification of the new covenant. And so, as Hebrews says, the time of reformation would come after he would die and resurrect, right? To bring them, therefore, a better covenant taking it all the way back to Abraham in the order of Melchizedek, which was a covenant that came through faith. Before anything, it was through faith. We know that the Levitical priesthood came as a result of the sin of the golden calf, which came through the flesh, an act of the flesh, an act of impurity, a sinful act altogether, which broke the covenant. And so we see that though she did touch his tzitzit, which represented the temporal law that was given to them as a witness against them, we see that what he tells her is what? Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. And I don't know if you ladies see it now, but I see it. Like, I see it. Like, he basically reinstated, you are going to go back to the Melchizedek order. Your faith has made you well. It has grafted you back into the covenant, the better covenant. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction, because we know that the affliction had carried them through because they had the law as a witness against them. I know maybe too deep. If you haven't done the Galatian study, I do highly then recommend go back. It's only 3 studies, meaning it's 6 chapters, but done in 3 studies. Take your time. Also do the Hebrew studies, and it will bring so much more understanding on this matter. Let's keep it rolling. Matthew 9:20, connecting with this precept as well. And suddenly a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years came from behind and touched the hem of his garment. Again, this is in connection with Matthew 9:20. We have Mark 3, verse 10. For he healed many, so that as many as had afflictions pressed about him to touch him. This is just confirming the other accounts found in Mark and again in Luke 6:19. And the whole multitude sought to touch him, for power went out from him and healed them all. So it went out from him. So it wasn't coming out of the representation of his Torah, but it was coming from him, for he is the fulfillment of the entire Torah. Yasmin, did you want to say something? So thank you, ladies, for breaking bread with us. Thank you. This was a shorter class than what we've been doing. Yeah, I noticed, Yasmin. No problems. But it was very edifying. I pray that it brought deeper understanding. I pray that it brought you even more in love with your master, your creator, the only one that has the power to seize the winds from the ocean, the winds from your life, the troubles of this life. And I pray that you remember this. I am going to go back to this because I do want to say it again, because I caught myself literally this week crying out to him this way. So remember this. Psalm 69:1-3. Save me, O Elohim, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no standing. I have come into deep waters where the floods overflow me. I am weary with my crying. My throat is dry. My eyes fail while I await for my Elohim. Cry out like this to him and understand that he will come for you. Not only will he comfort you, but he will help your unbelief. He will for sure increase your faith, and he will draw you out of deep waters. And I pray this over your lives, but I know for sure it's going to take place because he answers when we come knocking on his door. He's just there waiting for us to cry out to him, and that we can encourage our faith daily. So may this be a blessing to you, those watching, catching the replay later. I pray all these things upon your lives as well. Much baruka or blessings upon your life. May Abba continue protecting you, guiding you to all truth. Oh, wait, I do want to close with this. I forgot to read Sirach. Remember, I had said, and I know I said we were finishing, but no, no, no. This is such a beautiful precept found in the Apocrypha, meaning the embodiment of Messiah being wisdom. And I'm going to read it fully, and then we'll end the recording. But let's read it because it really ministered me. It was so beautiful. All right. So wisdom will praise herself and will glory in the midst of her people. In the assembly of the Most High, she will open her mouth, and in the presence of his hosts, she will glory. I came forth from the mouth of the Most High and covered the earth like a mist. I dwelt in high places, and my throne was in a pillar of cloud. Sound familiar, right? Alone I have made the circuit of the vault of heaven and have walked in the depths of the abyss, in the waves of the sea, in the whole earth, and in every people and nation I have gotten a possession. Among all these I sought a resting place. I sought in whose territory I might lodge. Then the creator of all things gave me a commandment, and the one who created me assigned a place for my tent. And he said, make your dwelling in Jacob. I get goosebumps. Woo! And in Israel, receive your inheritance. From eternity in the beginning, he created me, and for eternity I shall not cease to exist. In the holy tabernacle, I ministered before him, and so I was established in Zion. In the beloved city, likewise, he gave me a resting place, and in Jerusalem was my dominion. So I took root and in an honored people, in the portion of the Adon, who is their inheritance. I grew like a cedar in Lebanon, and like a cypress on the heights of Hermon. I grew tall like a palm tree in En-Gedi, and like rose plants in Jericho, like a beautiful olive tree in the field, and like a plane tree I grew tall. Like acacia and camel's thorn, I gave forth the aroma of spices, and like choice myrrh, I spread a pleasant odor. Like galbanum, onycha, and stacte, and like the fragrance of frankincense in the tabernacle. Like terebinth, I spread out my branches, and my branches are glorious and graceful. Like a vine, I caused loveliness to bud, and my blossoms became glorious and abundant fruit. Speaking of the fruits of the Spirit, come to me, you who desire me, and eat your fill of my produce. For the remembrance of me is sweeter than honey, and my inheritance sweeter than the honeycomb. Those who eat me will hunger for more, his word. And those who drink me will thirst for more, because he is the living waters, right? Whoever obeys me will not be put to shame. And those who work with my help will not sin. All this is the book of the covenant of the Most High God. This is why I needed to read this, guys, because this is like the embodiment of Messiah and what we basically said during the study of Galatians. Speaking of the book of the covenant, right? All this is the book of the covenant of the Most High, the law which Moses commanded us as an inheritance for the congregations of Jacob. It fills man with wisdom like the Pishon and like the Tigris at the time of the first fruits. It makes them full of understanding like the Euphrates and like the Jordan at harvest time. It makes instruction shine forth like light, like the Gihon at the time of vintage. Just as the first man did not know her perfectly, the last one has not fathomed her either. For her thought is more abundant than the sea, and her counsel deeper than the great abyss. Remember, Yasmin, we were talking about the things that we cannot even fathom, and Jessica? Oh, it's beautiful. I went forth like a canal from a river, and like a water channel into a garden, the Garden of Eden. I said, I will water my orchard and drench my garden plot. And lo, my canal became a river, rivers of living waters, guys. And my river became a sea. I will again make instruction shine forth like the dawn, and I will make it shine afar. I will again pour out teaching like prophecy and leave it to all future generations. I believe this is us today. Observe that I have not labored for myself alone, but for all who seek my instruction. And with this, we end. Messiah is indeed the embodiment of the Torah, the embodiment of the Holy Spirit, his Holy Spirit, the embodiment of wisdom as Matthew portrayed him here. What a beautiful way to end this study. So, again, now for real this time, many blessings to all of you. We'll see each other next week. Shalom.